Hey, welcome back. We're going to paint that ear now. So let's begin as we have been by matching some values. We're going to get out our image of the ear with the palette, and here we go. We're going to start up here behind the ear on this form. And if I take a sample of the value here, drag it over to my palette, I can see that it's really light. It's about 8.5. And coming down to here, goes down to about 7.5. And then of course in the shadow, it's going to be much darker, about 5. And that 5 continues all the way around, a little darker right under the earlobe. So 8.5, 7.5, and 5 are the main values that we need to do this. So let's start at the top here. And we're just going to lay in thinly again, starting out thinly. Something very light. That's about 8.5. Notice that it's just about the same value as the underpainting. And it should end up being just a little bit brighter than the background in this section of the painting. So again, darker than, just a hair darker than the underpainting and a hair lighter than the background on the wall that we did last time. It's more important that your value relationships are correct than that you've matched your actual values. So what I'm looking for is to make this edge light enough so that it stands out from the wall just about as much as it does in the photograph. And that background is, of course, dry, so we can go right back over it a little bit to get a really nice crisp edge. Thinning the paint with water as needed. And we can use the heel of the brush like this to get a nice sharp edge that's pressing harder with the brush. And I'm not worried about the variations yet. I'm just trying to get this all in there. Now I'm going to go down to number value 8, which is just a little darker than what we've been using. That's our transitional area. And then down to 7.5. Remember, that's what we saw as the form moves away from the light towards the shadow. not in shadow yet, but moving that direction. And that 7.5 goes all the way down to all the way down to here. Whoops. I didn't mean to do that. I just wasn't looking and I picked up one of my shadow values with the brush. So I'm going to use a damp brush and just lift that off. And then go right back in with my number 7. And up here on the upper right, this is going to be still 8, 8.5. I don't see much darkening. Obviously, we can't hope to paint this entire ear in one sitting, even though there are transitions throughout that need to be done wet into wet. So what I'm going to do is break it up into a few sessions, and I'm going to show you how to leave the paint thin along the edge between the old work and the new work. Okay. It's pretty straightforward. And remember, I'm not worried about really fine detail yet. I'm just trying to get things laid in. So now I'm going to lay in that whole shadow. So use a clean brush. And remember, that was going to be number 5. So I'm going to take my middle value. I'm going to thin it with some water. And I'm going to test that. Looks about right. See, it's just a little bit darker than the underpainting. Maybe a little too dark though, because I'm seeing that I need to be a little more contrast here to here. So I'm going to pick up a little bit of number 6 on my brush and test this edge. Now it could be that I just didn't go dark enough in the background, but I don't want to fix that, so I'm going to, yeah, that edge shows up. That's good enough. So that's maybe 5.5 right now. And I'm not paying any attention to my transitions yet. Remember that lay-in has to go pretty quick, and you don't want to have to worry about blending your edges while you're laying the paint in. You just knock it in there pretty quick. And I guess we're going to go all the way out to the earlobe today. We'll stop there. And I'm going to leave this very soft so we can, this area is pretty flat, so we can just move into that transition. I said earlobe, and I meant to say it's tragus. But you probably knew what I was talking about. So remember, this was going to go down a little darker when we get down under the earlobe. So I'm going to go down. I'm going to try number 4 right here. Again, though, is that going to give me enough contrast from here to here? Maybe 4.5. A little more water on the brush. Yeah, that edge is showing up well enough. And then notice that right under the earlobe it gets dark, so I'm going to try maybe even like a 3.5 right up in here. Maybe even 3. Like that. Yeah, that's quite dark right there. And I'm going to be careful when I'm doing the darkest parts of the shadows to really put that paint on thinly, because I want that warmth of the underpainting to show through a little bit. So, got some water in the paint. And then this shadow color, this section right here, it comes around to where this chip is. Right there. Okay, now we're going to do some blending. This is the fun part. All the measuring of values and laying in is sort of a chore, but this is where it starts to make it look good. So if this was 7 and this was 4 or 5, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a little bit of number 6 and put it in between, because that's a soft edge. And if just by laying in that in between value, it's going to make my blending go more easily. And while that's on my brush, I'm even going to go up here where I have another kind of soft transition. Put in a little number 6 there, and also right through here. Okay, now wipe off the brush again. And back down to here. And I'm hatching across that edge softly. And then keep wiping off the brush with my paper towel. I'm going to pull a little bit of this halftone up along this little piece of edge here. And then notice I have a little hint of really reflected light along this edge under here. So what I'm going to do is, that was number 5. I'm going to go back to my number 6 again. And I'm going to just lighten that edge a tiny bit. I might need to use a smaller brush. See how that edge just pops a little more? I don't want to go too bright there. And there's also a little bit of core shadow, a little darkening above that reflected light, which I'm going to try to do with the number 3. See how that little darkening there just brings the reflected light out even more? Most beginners they try to get this effect by making the reflected light way too bright. But we're getting there the smart way. We're just darkening above it, and that makes it stand out more. And I'm going to go just a little darker right under here. That's my number 2 value. That's really pretty intensely dark. I'll zoom in on that so you can see it a little better. Now it doesn't look 100% right for the simple reason that this is all much lighter than it's going to be. So that makes this look darker than it has to. But I also just noticed a little drawing mistake, which really should have made this whole earlobe a little longer. Now, this is not a mistake that I necessarily have to correct, but I'm just going to show you how I would do it. Same thing, we're just going to put water on the brush. We're not scrubbing it too hard, just pushing that paint away from the edge. And try not to lift off too much of my underpainting. A little bit is coming off, but I'm not going to worry about it. I'm going to leave that like that. It's important to know how to fix things, not so much for painting casts of ears, because after all, people have all different kinds of earlobes. But if you're painting a portrait, it might matter a lot that you made the nose too big or something. So, okay, now we're gonna blend this transition between the between the number 5 and number 4 value. I'm gonna just leave that all very big so I can work into it later. And now I'm coming up on that tragus. I'm going to go to my number 2 value, and I'm going to put in this accent. Notice there's like a core shadow on either side with a little reflected light in the middle, which I'm doing with, like I said, number 2. And I forgot to put this highlight on the tragus in, so let's check that value. That's going to be, let's see. So we're trying to match this one right here. See that? And that's going to be 8.5 again. See, that value is very similar to what we started with up here. Now, if you're wondering why it looks so much brighter, it's because this up here has light all around it. We talked about that last time. It says dark all around it, so it looks brighter. A beginner is going to make this just pure white, but it isn't really. So 8.5. We should have done that in the beginning, but I wasn't thinking of it. And between the 5 and the 8.5, we're going to put a little bit of number 7 right in through here. Some painters do talk to themselves this way as they're working, like they get used to a numerical system of measuring values. I'm not one of those painters. I do not. This is not totally natural for me, but I usually just go for it. But it's probably not a bad idea to get in the habit of sort of really getting a feel for what different values look like and giving them all names. So now I've got to blend this little transition here. Hatch across the edge a little bit. I'm going to hatch across this edge a little bit. And then keep wiping the brush off, and then sweep the brush along the edge to get the brush strokes out. There are some highlights here that are closer to our top value, which is number 9. So I'm going to take a little bit of pure white. Just going to put in a little stroke of a highlight there. Little stroke there. And then a little tiny halftone using number, I would say number 7. Like that. And see what's happening? This little tiny shadow, when it's placed opposite this little light, creates a sense of that little divot in the cast. Now this shadow edge looks a little too sharp still, so I'm going to do one more sequence hatching across the edge and then hatching with the edge. And these darks I haven't blended yet. I'm going to hatch across them. Like that, and maybe just a little more core shadow right through here. That's too dark, so that was me not measuring. I just went for it and that was too dark. So measuring is a good thing. See, now I gotta fix this. Okay, that does it. Now inside this shadow right here, there's a tiny bit of light. So I'm gonna jump up to my number 8 value. Test that. Yeah, that looks about right. And I'm just gonna blend that around. And notice that same, it's a reflected light source, also causing a slight lightening along this edge. And it's good that that's all nice and wet still. Notice I just went over my edge a little bit, so once again, clean my brush, get a little bit of water, and just get rid of that mistake. And because some of these brush strokes are bothering me, I'm going to take a bigger brush and just sort of fuzz this all out. At this point it's faded a little too much, so I'm going to pop in a little more light. See, we don't want this light to compete with that light, but it's definitely there. Yeah, that's about right. Okay, now we're up to this transition area, which we also laid in today. And we're going to hatch along this edge here and a little bit along this one. That's actually looking a little too soft, so to sharpen it, I'm going to shade with the edge, not across it. And that just tightens it a tiny bit. This is my light going into my halftone. I'm going to hatch across that transition, wipe off my brush, and then go from the halftone to the shadow, like that. And then, before I get rid of my brush strokes, I'm going to go down to a number 4 value. And you see that we've got a little core shadow through here too. So I'm just going to do a little bit of darkening right through here. See how that does the thing of bringing that reflected light out again? And then I'm going to do a final blend of just sweeping my brush along that edge. Notice I've got a little bit of a orange underpainting showing along that edge. Probably want to just fix that later when I'm painting, touch up the background a little bit. And also notice I did put in a little bit of cast shadow right above, right at the top of the tragus here. And that's going to have to be another place where I kind of leave off painting until next time. But again, wherever I'm going to leave off my edge, I just want to leave the paint really thin, because I'm not going to be able to blend that later, so I want to have it thin enough not to be too hard to work over. Like this is another little transition that I'm going to have to do later. So thin that out. So, that's what we have so far. Check everything. And I think it looks all right. So, if you want to continue right to the next video, you can, but this is also not a bad place to stop. I'll see you next time. Thanks.